Hello everyone, back tuning in to today's video. So we're going to have a look at one of its week to 10 days primarily in today's video. This takes into the second half of February. We're also going to have a look at CFSV2, see what that's showing for the rest of February and into March. We're going to start off with Stratosphere and with a bit of a look back at January. So quite a lot to cram in, actually, for today's video. It's more like the sort of thing we tend to do on a Sunday rather than a weekday. But a lot to talk about today. Before I get on with all of that, just say about the ads. There's links to articles on all the pages. Have a browse, register, click through links. Going to help us page website. And thanks very much for doing that. So just starting off with January, and try and put the finishing touches onto what happened in January. So, the centering temperature still hasn't updated. We haven't had an update from the CET since 22nd of January. Quite a long time back now. Not sure what's going on there. I did tweet the UK Met Office yesterday to ask when they'd be updated the CET, and they didn't have an answer for me, so I don't know what's going on. But anyway, at that point, up to the 22nd of January, the CET was standing at 4.8, an anomaly of a degree above average. Now, although the CET hasn't updated, we can have a look at the UK climate averages at the UK Met Office. They have all updated, and I suppose they're a bit better, actually, for northern parts of the country particularly. So Northern England, Northern Ireland, Wales, the CET doesn't really apply to you. So this is how things look in terms of the temperature for January 2017, set against 61 to 1990, the old and cold temperature average that encompasses, of course, the cold decade of the 1960s. And we see it's a very unusual month in that the far north and west had the warmest anomaly. It was milder there. And the south and east was cooler. Now, just average set against 61 to 1990 through the Midlands, east and southeast England, although the extreme southeast around Kent did come out a bit colder than average, even against 61 to 90. But essentially, if set against 61 to 90, you see that the south and east was near normal, the north and west was milder than average. But if you look at a more modern temperature average, such as 81 to 2010, which of course takes into account all of the warming that occurred through the 1980s and particularly through the 1990s, you see that it was a colder than average month down in the southeast. So those of you that live in the southeast and don't think you ever get any cold weather, actually set against 81 to 2010, the southeast of England did have a colder than average January. Wales, the Midlands, Northern England coming out around average with those temperatures, and Scotland and Northern Ireland still suffering with above average temperatures up there. So very much a flip on what we normally expect in the UK, indicating that we have had a very unusual sort of pattern so far this winter. The precipitation anomaly set against 61 to 1990 shows that the north was dry, very dry through Scotland and Northern Ireland, also dry through Wales and South West England, the Midlands and the South East coming out with average precipitation. And that's the same whether we look at 61 to 90 or 81 to 2010. Very similar in terms of what happened. Drier than average in the north and west, near normal, not wet, but near normal down in the south and the east. So a very unusual January, very unusual patterns for January 2017. Right, let's have a look at the stratosphere then, and these are the temperatures at 10 HPA over the North Pole. We got the second warming that I spoke about yesterday. There it is, the temperature spiked again at 10 HPA over North Pole. The latest is that it's beginning to drop back now, going down to that level. It is still significantly warmer than average, though, of course, at 10 HPA, significantly above the grey line. So the stratospheric warming, I think it's winding down now, and over the next couple of weeks we won't really need to look at these charts except to see how it sort of goes back to closer to average. But I think that's the last intense burst of warmth that we're going to get over the stratosphere, over the North Pole for the time being. At 30 HPA, we currently stand here. So that warming that occurred the other day across the North Pole at 10 HPA. That's beginning to lift the temperature up again at 30 HPA, so that's starting to move down. That might lift up a little bit more at 30 HPA, might go back up to that sort of level tomorrow or on Thursday. But again, I think the overall idea is that the temperature in the stratosphere will now start to cool down, and we've got to wait and see what the tropospheric response is, if we get one, to this stratospheric warming that has occurred. So these are the temperatures at 10 HPA with the GFS model. This is the temperature forecast for 10 HPA over the North Pole. Still pretty warm over the top of the pole, you have to say that. And as we go through into the rest of this week, we find those temperatures gradually dipping down. There they go, the blue colours beginning to come back with no real intensity. So we're only going back closer to average, but it does look as though the bursts of warming that have been occurring over the past week or two at 10 HPA, as they are winding down now. We go through to the second half of February. We try to get a little bit of a warming occurring again, actually, from Siberia, but that one looks fairly insignificant. However, right at the very end, this takes us to the 23rd of January. It looks like those warm temperatures are beginning to gather there across Europe and into Russia. That might be the start of another warming for the end of February. We couldn't really say whether that would be, but this tends to be the area where the warming events occur, or start off, I should say. Somewhere around Europe or Russia tends to be the place where they start off. So we might, a couple of days after that, push another burst of warmth into the stratosphere at 10 HPA. But for the time being, the next couple of weeks, I don't think we really have to worry too much about what's going on at 10 HPA, because we're just going to gradually cool down. Doesn't look like we're going to get any more stratospheric warmings for a little while. So, looking at the GFS ensembles then for the next couple of weeks, the red line here is the 30-year temperature average. And we're going to be going colder over the rest of this week. So today it actually feels quite spring-like. I've been out today and it feels very pleasant in the sunshine, but this is the warmest day of the week by far, and by tomorrow we'll be starting to pull in bitterly cold air from the east. As we go through to the end of the week, actually we get quite a drop in the temperature. Looks like we're going to briefly bring in temperatures of 10 HPA in the upper atmosphere. That's bitterly cold air with a low dew point and an easterly wind. You really will feel that. Now, as we go through into the start of next week, that's going to continue into the weekend, but through to the start of next week, a very subtle difference is going to take place, or a very subtle change, I should say, in the wind direction. We're going to go from an easterly to a southeasterly, and that's probably going to drag up some milder, I should probably say less cold air from southern Europe. So early next week, I think the signs are there that we're probably going to turn things a bit milder for a day or two. However, I think the second half of next week, and we see this with the ensembles, there is a bit of a split for the second half next week. That's this period just here. But the second half of next week, I think we could well start to drag in some colder air again. You see, it's about a 50-50 split, really, for the second half of next week between the ensemble members that are keeping things a little bit milder, on the milder side, second half next week, and the ensemble members that turn things colder again. I've got a feeling we'll turn things colder into the second half of next week, but certainly up to the end of the weekend, we've got those easy winds coming in, then it's less cold, probably, and then I suspect we go colder again. Let's have a look at the temperature anomaly for the next week. This going from the 7th to the 15th of February. It's colder than average. Most of Europe also coming out colder than average as well, so not doing too badly this week for cold and average temperature anomalies. Scandinavia, where it has been very warm through this winter, looking a little bit better for those colder than average temperature anomalies as well. Precipitation coming out drier than average through most parts of the country. That tends to be what happens when you have it cold. You tend to have it quite dry. So here's how things are looking with the GFS for Saturday then, pulling in that easterly wind. Now we have got a disturbance here in the North Sea. This little kink in the ice bars, an elongation, could be a trough coming in off the North Sea. that might enhance the wintry shower risk over the weekend. And actually, I'm going to update Snow Watch tonight around 7 o'clock, just to have a bit of a heads up about what the snow potential could be, if there is any, with these easterly winds. So if you want to know more about snow, there will be a Snow Watch coming up tonight. Through into Sunday, the easterly wind is still, well, it's beginning to back a little bit more southeasterly, you notice, but essentially it's still a cold day. I think probably quite a bitter cold day on Sunday, but by Monday the change in wind direction has taken place. Yesterday the GFS was suggesting very cold conditions throughout next week, has shifted a little bit on that and gone towards the ECM WF solution. Not all that surprised that it's done that, to be honest. So the Scandinavian high is still there, pressure is still high over Scandinavia. It's just a very slight difference between the ridge up there and the trough down here is pulling up the air more from sort of the Mediterranean as opposed to pulling it in from eastern parts of Europe and Russia. So it's a very slight difference in the wind direction, but it does make a difference. It will pull up some less cold air through into the early part of next week. And then through to the second half of next week, I think this is when we've got to watch out for the chance of getting the wind back towards the east again. You notice by Thursday, 16th of February, this particular run of the GFS, it still has the wind direction coming from the southeast, but it's very close again to pulling the wind in from the east. Notice also we're beginning to get heights rising to the north a little bit, so signs of retrogression, trying to get high pressure up towards Greenland. What actually happens on this run of the GFS is that the high pressure does end up going to the north and west of the UK, and we start to pull down a much colder northerly wind as we get through into the second half of the month. We turn the winds from east or southeast in sort of northerlies with a blocker building over Greenland. Now that could be down to the stratospheric warming. I'm a bit dubious about whether this Scandinavian high has much to do with the stratospheric warming, because this winter has been a winter that has tried to build pressure over Scandinavia anyway. So it's one of those winters where pressure keeps trying to rise over Scandinavia. So we can't really say that the stratospheric warming has much to do with the Scandinavian high. But this is more what you'd expect to see after a sudden stratospheric warming, pressure and heights rising over Greenland and stretching back in towards the Arctic. So that could be a response from stratospheric warming. I'm not sure whether it is or not. But anyway, that's the idea from the GFS, that eventually, after a milder interlude next week, we start to pull down colder air once again. Having a look at the ECMWF, again, there's the easterly coming through the country into the weekend, so it looks like you're going to have a cold weekend into Sunday. Wind still directly coming in from the east. That could be a bitter wind as well, and we will have a look and see what the snow potential is with that when we do Snow Watch. Early next week, we start to turn the wind more towards the southeast, so I mean, this is still going to be quite a chilly wind. It's just not the bitter easterly, but the content is still going to be very cold, so I assume there'll still be a risk of frost and maybe fog could become a concern through the early part of next week. Having a lot of fog this winter, and that could come back a bit, I think, through the course of next week. Into the second half of next week, we, with the ECMWF anyway, we sort of find ourselves with high pressure still sitting to the south and to the west. Heights possibly trying to rise across Greenland, but not as definitively as what the GFS is doing. So there is still a split here between the GFS and the ECMWF, with the GFS looking colder, actually, as we're going through into the second half of next week. Finally, just having a look at the charts from the CFS model for the next month, just to keep you up to date on what's going on there. So these are 500 millibar heights broken down into week periods. The first week period takes us from the 7th through to the 13th of February. We find a big ridge over Scandinavia in the coming week, and the wind will be coming in from the east, so it looks very cold with those easterly winds. Week 2 also looks easterly with the CFS, so this is the 14th to the 20th. And this is when the models are trying to drag up that slightly milder or slightly less cold air from the southeast. The CFS is still placing that ridge over Scandinavia, the low pressure's down here, and I think the air's still really more or less coming from the east, so that looks pretty cold as well going into the second half of the month. It's not impossible, excuse me, that will keep the winds in from the east rather than turning them into the southeast. It looks quite well supported that early next week we will get these slightly milder southeasterly winds, but it's not impossible that we might keep the wind more from the east through the early part of next week. That's certainly what the CFS is seeing. We go through to week 3, the 23rd through 27th of February. Still have the ridge over Scandinavia, although it is easing off somewhat. The trough is in the Atlantic. I suspect this would have a little bit more of a southeasterly component, although still not all that far away at all from being cold. And then week 4, which takes us to the end of February, 28th of February, to 6th of March, looks like the ridge is repositioning and going more towards Greenland and Iceland, so that's not at all far from pulling down a northerly wind. Notice the trough is in there over Scandinavia as well. I suspect if we rolled on a little bit longer, we would find this ridge becoming centred here. The trough over Scandinavia would deepen and push southwards, and would turn the wind into the north through the early part of March. So that's how it's looking for the next few days, next few weeks anyway. It looks like we're going to get the bitterly cold easterly wind at the end of the week and into the weekend. I'll have more on the snow risk with that when we update Snow Watch this evening. Early next week, the idea is to get the wind into the southeast a little bit more, so slightly milder or less cold air is dragged up from the central Mediterranean for the early part of next week. And then the second half of next week, and going into the second half of February, I think we've got to be watching out initially potentially to turn wind back to the east again and pull some colder air back in from the east. Longer term, I think we might have to think into the second half of February about the heights rising towards Greenland and possibly getting the wind into the north. That's a long way off and very uncertain, but that will be one to keep an eye on in the more extended range. Right, that's it for now. Come back tonight around 7 o'clock for Snow Watch. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.